By we would take a quote, and then the kids would have to expand on that quote in a certain specific way. There were 8 points that they had to follow. Then we started doing fables. They would get a moral for the story, and then they had to come up with the story, right? So, slow and steady wins the race, and then they had to. One of the important things that they had to do was, okay, I got to make sure that my character's the right character, right? So, slow and steady wins the race. What would be the perfect animal for that? How about a tortoise and a goldfish? No, that's not going to work. We need something else, right? So, all the way this year, we've been working to this point where we're doing these classical speeches, and I'll describe these a little bit too. So there are, remind me guys, is it 6 parts? There's 6 parts in the classical speech. So part of it's not so much a grade, it's just elimination. So part of how I'm going to determine who moves on, who gets eliminated, is the biggest part is the structure. If they're not following the structure, it'll be very easy for me to just say, okay, the other person who did follow the structure wins. So the structure is this. It starts obviously with an introduction. It's called the exordium. And in this specific paper, which these classical speeches, by the way, they were designed, and you'll see with these scenarios, they were designed for like courtroom speeches for lawyers. This is the way that a lawyer would come in and defend or prosecute somebody in ancient Rome. And it's also something that they would do like on a Friday night. Cicero would go up and he would, but they've had time to prepare it, but Cicero would go up and he would get, the ceramic pot with his prompt written out here. You got to defend this guy. He stole from here or whatever, but you have to say that he's innocent. And then Cicero would, in the time that he's walking, he got his prompt to the time that he got to the podium. He would try to think of everything, and then he would speak for an hour. And everybody would come out on a Friday night, and that was their movie. That was their entertainment. So that's what we're doing. They start with an exordium, and in the exordium, one of the important things, so you guys can be on the lookout for this, is they don't want to show their hand. They don't want to give away who they're for or against. And the reason being is because you assume that your audience is hostile, right? In a courtroom setting, you're going to have some people for, some people against. So you don't want to immediately alienate the people who are against you by coming out and saying, I think that it's ridiculous that we're even considering prosecuting this person. So that's the exordium. They're going to be careful not to show their hand, but they're going to give us some sort of principle that we can all agree with that they're going to use later on in their arguments. Then the narratio, you can usually take these and just put an N at the end of it. It becomes an English word. So the narration. The second part, they're going to be given the details. An important thing to realize about the details that they're going to give is that some of the kids might have contradictory details. And that's just because their prompt is very short. Their prompt is like a paragraph long. And so they have to fill in some of the details. So one kid might say something happened at 10 a.m. Another kid will say it happened at 11 a.m. And we just kind of have to ignore that. That's okay. I've never done a mock trial, never seen a mock trial, but I think that's one of the things that they do is they have a lot of time that they spend memorizing the facts. And somebody's going to be a witness at the mock trial, and they have to memorize, okay, I did this at 9:32, I saw this at 9:45. So that would be another step where we have more time to prepare and figure out exactly what the details were. But in their narratio, they're going to be saying what happened, when it happened, who did what, and some of those details might conflict, but don't hold that against them. They just didn't have a lot of specifics in the prompt. So the next part is the partitio. The partitio is the most boring part where they just say what their 3 arguments are going to be. So it's not until this point where they finally say, I believe that this guy's innocent, I believe he's guilty for this reason, and this reason. The next part is the confirmatio. That's when they lay out their 3 reasons. So when they first tell you the reasons, you might not necessarily get it, why they're saying, well, how does it, but they're going to explain it. 3 different arguments, and I told them I want your strongest argument first, and then decreasing power of argument. The refutatio is next, where they take arguments from the other side, and everybody's matched up against each other. So you have Zeke, right? So Eli has Zeke, and Eli needs to try to get into Zeke's shoes. He's already written it, right? And he got in Zeke's shoes, and what is Zeke gonna say? And to have a refutatio is a very strong part of the speech, because you can be, especially if you go first. Being first is an advantage in the speech, in a speech like this, because you can kind of prophesize Zeke's going to tell you that this, and this, but that's ridiculous for this reason, right? So in the refutatio, they're going to try to come up with arguments that the other side is going to make and refute them, and it's going to be another great point for me to be like, okay, who's going to win between these two, this head-to-head matchup? Did they really figure out what the other person was going to say and refute it before they even got a chance to say it? And then the last part is the peroratio. That's the conclusion. And again, it's the ancients. They said this is the moment where you want to really get the emotions going. And I think we see this like fairly often, if not every Sunday. Like we end the sermon usually gets a little bit more like, what about you? What about the children? That sort of thing. They start to tug at the heartstrings. But even if they don't do that in the sermon itself, that's kind of what we're doing in the Lord's Supper, isn't it? It's now becoming more emotional, if you want to call it that. Whereas at the beginning of a sermon, right, if you hear a pastor come out of the gates and start explaining what this Greek word means, what this Hebrew word means, you've got the energy for that at the beginning of the speech. At the end of the speech, you might be, starting to wane, and so he comes back with an emotional plea. That's what the ancients said. They said, okay, right at the end, that's when we put a cherry on top, and the cherry is emotions. So you should be looking for that in the conclusion. Is how did the kids play with emotions at the end of their speech? So those are the 6 parts we're looking for in this classical speech, and each of these have a scenario. I'll read the scenario for you so you know what they've been assigned. And I think I wanted to start with is it Izzy and Haddie. So three of these scenarios are crafted thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago. This one's from Quintilian. There's one, Eli and Zeke have one that's a modern scenario, but this one is, students and professional orators from 2,000 years ago did exactly this prompt. So it's a lot of fun. All right, this is a nice, short, easy scenario. The law forbids exporting wool from Tarentum. A Tarentine shepherd sells sheep from his flock to a foreigner. His punishment is sought. I'm going to read it again because there's a little bit of what's going on here. The law forbids exporting wool from Tarentum. A Tarentine shepherd sells sheep from his flock to a foreigner. His punishment is sought. Maybe I'll explain it for the younger people. You guys catch that? So you're not allowed to export wool, right? You're not allowed to sell wool outside the city. He sold sheep outside the city. You guys see the problem? Yeah? Okay. Let's start with Izzy.
You're already arguing for somebody's side?
No, I'm just making sure the kids see the confusion.
How can we expect to thrive as a country if we don't have something of value to offer the world outside our walls? How can we expect to be relevant in the world if we cannot set ourselves apart from the others? The land of Tarentum is well known for a unique breed of sheep that produces the most excellent wool. Across all of Rome, these sheep can only be found in Tarentum. Consequently, the law states that their wool cannot be sold outside of Tarentum so as to control the trade of this highly sought-after textile. But Alexander Reyes has been caught smuggling his sheep across the borders of Tarentum. People demand government intervention. Alexander needs to be castigated for selling our wool beyond our borders. In fact, he needs a greater punishment to fit a greater crime. He has undermined trade laws, compromised infrastructure, and could single-handedly erode our government integrity. He is undermining the economic integrity of our trade laws. He not only exported wool, he gave them the sheep itself. This is much worse than just selling bales of wool. After the wool has been used up, there's nothing left to use. With sheep, it's different. After shearing a sheep and using its wool, the sheep will grow more wool, and you can shear it again, and again, and again. He sold an entire lifetime of wool, and he should be punished for selling an entire lifetime of wool. He has compromised our infrastructure. The law was not to keep us from selling the wool, but to keep the wool from leaving the state. Once the sheep are out, anyone who wants to can start breeding and manufacturing our wool. There goes our precious commodity, our livelihood, our only say in world trade. If we sell the sheep, the wool law becomes irrelevant. Alexander could single-handedly erode our government integrity. If citizens see a loophole and are able to use it without repercussions, they're going to exploit it and be progressively encouraged to abuse other laws. Eventually, they will ignore our laws altogether and chaos will reign. My lovely counterpart may argue that selling the sheep itself is completely different from selling the wool, but she is wrong. Think about it like this. If we were in a war, would we sell one of our enemies a gun? Of course not. So why would we sell the enemy an entire munitions factory? That's even worse than helping just one man. This is what Alexander has done with the sheep. Alexander should be punished for more than just selling wool, because he has compromised infrastructure, undermined trade laws, and could single-handedly erode our government's integrity.
Ready?
Yeah. Thanks.
Sovereignty must not be used for inflicting harm on anyone, whether citizen or foreigner. The law forbids exporting wool from Tartan. Selling it to anyone who is not a citizen was a major offense, punishable by many years in prison, or even the loss of their flock. A Tarentine shepherd sells his sheep to the flock, a sheep from his flock to a foreigner. His punishment is now sought. In this paper, I'm going to prove to you that the shepherd should not be punished in 3 reasons. First, precision of language. Second, to put yourself in their shoes. Third, personal welfare. First, precision of language. This man, the shepherd, has probably unknowingly sold sheep to a foreigner. Now, the law states specifically that the Tarentine wool was not to be sold to a foreigner. Yes, but for all we know, this man could have sold old, worthless sheep already shorn for the season, sheep young and deformed. But it specifically states that the foreigner was sold sheep. Second, to put yourself into their shoes. To put yourself into foreigner's place was to realize he probably knew nothing of the law there, not like today where we have social media to connect with people around the world and know much more about everywhere else. This foreigner most likely didn't know the least thing about the law and just wanted to make a new life in a new place, and he could at least start out by getting a few scraggly old or deformed sheep from a poor farmer. 3, personal welfare. Shepherds don't usually just up and sell their sheep, especially to someone they don't know, and even more so in the time of this prompt. This shepherd was probably in debt to our Lord and needed the money to be able to keep his sheep at all. Being a shepherd was the lowest paying job, and to lose even that was suicide. If that was the only job that this man could manage, why let a simple misunderstanding come between the law and his family that he had to protect and provide for? My opponent might state that the law is the law and we can't let the children see someone get away with a major offense. But this is a weak argument because the law says, as stated above, that the wool may not be sold, but says nothing of the sheep. Selling the wool to only citizens does, in fact, make sense. But you do have to wash, cure, and dye it, doing all this special stuff to keep it special. Selling the sheep to someone who doesn't know all the stuff needed to be done to it has no effect. Think of the children. We do not want them to see that just over a little imprecise language that someone could lose their welfare. This man should be let off because he did not break any laws. We don't want our children to live in fear of losing their job, welfare, or even being put to death over imprecise language. Thank you.
Awesome. We should have had you guys come out for every speech because everybody's taking it up a notch. That's great. All right.
Are you going to execute the loser each?
Not right now. No. I've got, is this Eli? Eli's taking a video for me too because I'm taking this very seriously. I'm going to make sure I get this right. And if it's close and I got to, I don't know, maybe even time how much eye contact there is because it's so close I got to go on something. I'm going to go through it with Annie and we're going to make sure we get it right. All right, so the next scenario is done by Eli and Zeke. This is the scenario. It's the gun-bearing student. To crack down on violence, the administration at Southside High School adopts a policy that requires immediate expulsion for any student who brings a firearm onto school grounds. Phil Eastman, a conscientious student who loves to hunt, rises before dawn to go hunting before school one day. While hunting, he shoots an animal. It flees, but it is wounded. Rather than leaving it to wander miserably and bleed to death, he stalks it in order to finish it off. In order to arrive to class on time, he drives to school straight away. In the school parking lot, a teacher sees his gun in his truck. The teacher dutifully reports the gun. So Eli's going to start, and he's going to prosecute the student, Phil Eastman, that the school should expel him, and Zeke's going to defend him that the school should not expel him. Eli, you're first.
Do you want?
Yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, please do hand it to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world where laws are not made for the convenience of the obedient, but for the protection of the innocent. Every person in this room can agree that school ought to be a place of safety. Every person in this room ought to agree that the adults charged with protecting students bear a grave responsibility. The question before us today is whether that responsibility bends when the lawbreaker happens to be a good person. The facts of this case are not in dispute. Phil Eastman, a student at Southside High School, drove to campus with a firearm visible in his truck. A teacher saw it and reported it, as he was duty-bound to do. The school's policy is clear. Any student who brings a firearm onto school grounds faces immediate expulsion. Phil does not deny bringing the gun. He offers only an explanation, that he was hunting that morning and did not have time to go home first. I will demonstrate 3 reasons that the school should expel Phil Eastman. First, the rule. Second, the risk. And third, the ruin. The rule. The first reason that this school should expel Phil Eastman is the rule itself. The administration at Southside did not adopt this policy carelessly. It was created to draw a bright, unmistakable line. Students do not bring firearms onto school grounds. The moment we allow exceptions, the line ceases to exist. If Phil is excused because he is a hunter, then what of the next student who brings a weapon and claims it was an accident? What of the student who says he simply forgot? The policy works precisely because it is absolute. The instant it becomes negotiable, it protects no one. And let me be clear, I'm not arguing against that guns have no place near a school. If the administration chose to arm its teachers to place firearms in the hands of trained adults whose job it is to protect students, I would welcome it. The issue is not the presence of a gun, the issue is who had it, where it was, and who could have gotten to it. A firearm in a teacher's locked desk is security. A firearm sitting in an unlocked truck in a student parking lot is a liability. The risk. The second reason that the school should expel Phil Eastman is the risk he created. Phil left a gun in his truck. He then walked into the school and sat in class. That gun sat in the parking lot attended for hours. Consider everyone else who walks through that lot every single day. Other students, younger siblings being dropped off, anyone with access. Phil was not standing next to his truck guarding the weapon. He was in a classroom, and while he sat there, anybody walking by could have seen that gun exactly the way the teacher did, except the next person might not have reported it. The next person might have reached for it. We do not judge the safety of the situation by the intentions of the person who created it. We judge it by what could have happened. And what could have happened here is the nightmare that every parent sends their child to school praying it will never come. The ruin. The third reason that the school should expel Phil Eastman is the ruin that follows if we do not. If Southside makes an exception for Phil because he is well-liked, because he is conscientious, and because his reason seems sympathetic, then the policy is dead. Every future student who violates it will point to Phil Eastman and say, "You let him stay." The administration will have no ground to stand on. A law that is enforced selectively is not a law. It is suggestion. And suggestions do not keep students safe. Now, my opponent will tell you that Phil is a good student, that he loves to hunt, and that he meant no harm, that he was trying to do the right thing by putting a wounded animal out of its misery, rather than letting it suffer. I do not doubt any of this. Phil may be an excellent young man with a good heart, but the policy does not say immediate expulsion unless the person is a nice person. It does not say immediate expulsion unless the student has a good reason. It says immediate expulsion for any student who brings a firearm onto school grounds. Phil brought a firearm onto school grounds. Phil had a choice that morning. He could have been late to school. He could have driven to home first. He could have called ahead. He could have locked the gun in a case in his trunk. He chose instead to drive onto campus with a visible weapon in his truck and leave it there for the entire school day. That was his decision, and decisions have consequences. The law is not unjust simply because it is inconvenient for a sympathetic defendant. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about Phil Eastman. It is about the student who parked 2 spaces away from Phil's truck and never knew a loaded weapon was sitting 15 feet from her car. It is about the freshman walking through the law who could have looked through the window and seen something no child should have easy access to. It is about every parent who drops their son or daughter off at Southside, trusting that the adults in charge will keep their promises. The administration promised that firearms would not be tolerated on campus. If they break that promise for Phil, they have broken it for everyone. Expel Phil Eastman, not because he is a bad person, but because the law demands it. because the safety of every student requires it, and because a school that will not enforce its own rules has no authority left to enforce anything at all. Thank you.
It's on the back of the page too. Ladies and gentlemen, what does it mean to be in a high-trust society? This is when individuals are law-abiding citizens and are trusted with choices to the extent that they will not harm other law-abiding citizens or their property. When that trust is taken away, we are left with a highly regulated system. When individuals, for the most part, act responsibly, overregulation can become oppressive and should be avoided. Rules should be set for a reason, but when people abuse power and make rules for their own benefit instead of for the good of those that the rules are meant to protect, this becomes oppression and punishes the very people who respect the law. Southside High School has adopted a policy that requires immediate expulsion for any student who brings a firearm on the school grounds. Phil Eastman, a conscientious student who is an avid hunter, is up before dawn to hunt before his classes start. He shoots an animal, but it is wounded and it runs into the woods. He tracks it so that he can dispatch it in a humane manner. This causes him to leave from his hunting location in such haste that he is forced to leave his weapon in his vehicle. This results in one of the school administrators seeing his weapon in his car and reporting it, which is his job. Phil Eastman should not be expelled because his weapon was not being used to threaten an individual. There was no proof that he had harmful intent, and he is a responsible individual, which is displayed by his humane dispatch of an animal after hunting. Phil Eastman's weapon was not being used in a threatening way. It was stored in his vehicle, out of reach, but a school administrator reported it. They have no proof that Phil Eastman had harmful intent in his mind when he went to school that day. He most likely told them that he had been hunting that morning because he would have gone back in his camo. So they, as adults, should think intuitively that Phil was using his weapon to harvest game for his family. He is a responsible individual. Ladies and gentlemen, since this is even being debated, when a responsible individual is threatened with doing something out of character, we must have proof. If Phil is coming to school with harmful intent in his mind, then we would know, because of his background. Phil is a responsible individual, and has proven this because he is a hunter and dispatches animals in a humane way. He is not hunting them for sport. He is hunting them to provide sustenance for his family. Some people will argue that, as the law states, his gun was on school property, and he should be expelled. Ladies and gentlemen, he is a conscientious individual who, through reasoning and intuitive thinking, can make good decisions. Bringing his weapon onto the school grounds was out of necessity, not for harmful intent. A rule that cannot know why it has been enforced is a rule that punishes without recognition, without knowing why it has been enacted. What will be said of this school's reputation when other hunting families discover that Phil was expelled for honoring the Second Amendment? This, I can assure you, will not draw other families like Phil's to this school. He is not displaying his firearm in a way that would arouse suspicion or could be harmful to others. Phil is a reasoning person, making careful, responsible decisions and handling his firearm safely. A school that punishes conscientious individuals like Phil is an oppressive environment that will only invite more trouble upon itself. Restricting those with weapons who would only seek to protect invites predators to prey on the defenseless. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Up next, we're going back a couple thousand years. This is going to be Leah versus Natalya. Any priestesses found guilty of immorality must be thrown from the Tarpeian Rock. Julia, a priestess, is caught in immorality. She is escorted to the Tarpeian Rock and thrown off. She survives the fall. That's it. So, Leah is for Julia. Julia should be restored as priestess, and Natalya is against Julia. Julia should be thrown from the Tarpeian Rock again. Leah, you're first.
A wise man named Seneca once said, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." Sometimes righteous anger is an aid in serving justice to the evil and perverse. But at other times, anger and the revenge, bitterness, and blind hatred that come with it is our worst enemy. Similarly, it is important to make a distinction between wise justice and retaliation. We can all agree that justice is necessary, but once justice has been served, it is a wise man who does not seek further comeuppance. The law states that any priestess found guilty of immorality must be thrown from the Tarpeian rock. This is to ensure that only priestesses with great moral worth can serve at the temple. It casts out those with evil intentions and purifies the order and office of priestess. A certain priestess named Julia has been caught in immorality. According to the law, she is escorted to the Tarpeian rock and thrown off. However, she survives the fall, thereby posing the question, has she proven her worth by surviving against all odds? Or does she still bear the iniquity of her sins, and therefore deserve further punishment? Julia should be restored as priestess for 3 reasons. The gods have spoken, the sin has been paid for, and the law has been fulfilled. The first reason Julia should be restored as priestess is that the gods have spoken. The punishment for immorality is not mild. Everyone thrown from the Tarpeian rock is practically guaranteed to die. Indeed, it would be impossible to survive the fall in any normal way. It is obvious then that the gods' protection and blessing is upon Julia. Although human evidence points to immorality, it is sure that the gods must know her heart better than man, for which of us can read the motivations of the heart? Do you claim a wiser judgment than the gods? For surely this salvation at the last hour is from on high. Without divine intervention, she could not have withstood the violent blows against the jagged rock face, or the landing many peads below the precipice from which she was thrown. Would you then risk incurring the wrath of the gods, simply to pay homage to a man-made law? Which is stronger, divine judgment or the approbation of man? The verdict of the gods or the verdict of mere mortals? The second reason that Julia should be restored as priestess is that the sin has been paid for. All the law requires for retribution is that she be thrown from the rock. This has been done, and although it has not resulted in her death as anticipated, the sin has still been paid for. Recognizing her folly, she submitted to the righteous judgment. In sorrow and repentance, she was cast down, and restored from her sin, she was picked up again. Notwithstanding the fact that the gods have obviously forgiven her, she has also paid for her iniquity with her submission to death. By submitting to punishment, even unto death, and meeting her apparent demise, Julia has paid for her sins. If nothing else, the experience of falling from the cliff, the fear, the terrifying rush of ground coming up to meet her, the injuries she sustained, and the narrow escape from the wolf's mouth of death, these experiences have surely taught her a lesson. Punishment for Julia's sin was absolutely just. However, just because she happened to survive her punishment does not mean she should be punished again. To punish a sin is justice, to punish a mistake is malice. The third reason Julia should be restored as priestess is that the law has been fulfilled. The letter of the law states that a guilty priestess must be thrown from the Tarpeian rock. However, it has no caveat that the sinner must be thrown again and again until she dies. This is because it is impossible by ordinary means to survive a fall from such a height. However, in this case, Julia has miraculously come out unscathed. All the law demands is that the immoral priestess be cast from the precipice. In some way, unknown to mortal minds, she has survived her punishment. Yet, this is not an avoidance of the law, but still a fulfillment of it. She has fulfilled every letter of the law, every reasonable demand and specification. Because she has not been killed, she has become an exception to the rule. However, her exception will not cause a loophole by which others may escape justice. No one else has ever survived this punishment, and in all likelihood, no one else ever will. She herself has not made the exception, nor have the judges. Fate and the gods, instead, have created a situation outside natural law, to which judgment mortal minds must cleave. By continuing to pursue retribution after the law has been obeyed, you would be proving Seneca's quote correct. You would be proving that anger and retaliation can be more hurtful than the sins that caused them. My opponent will argue that although the letter of the law merely states that she be thrown from the rock, the spirit of the law intends for her to perish, and therefore she must be thrown again until she dies. However, the law was not written exhaustively. The wise ancients clearly knew that the only way to survive the fall was by divine intervention. Therefore, since they did not explicitly state that she must be repeatedly thrown until she was killed, it is implied that there is room in the law for the gods' mercy. My opponent might also claim that it was mere chance that saved Julia's life, and not the intervention of the gods at all. However, as evidenced from experience and from the law itself, there is no chance that someone could survive the terrible fall from the Tarpeian Rock. Why do you suppose that such a location was chosen? Because falls from the rock often resulted in the survival of the guilty? Dubious. It is obvious that Julia should have died a gruesome death, but in a display of divine mercy, the gods themselves interfered on her behalf. Contrary to what my opponent seeks to convince you of, this is not a fallacy of bifurcation. Rather, this is a case in which there are, in fact, only two logical outcomes. This is not an oversimplification of the choices. Either she would have been killed by the fall, or she would have been spared by the gods. One does not simply survive a fall from such a height. Even if she had simply fallen, she would have been killed, but this fails to take into the account the rocky cliffside she must have smashed into. Therefore, for a reason yet unknown to us, fate and the gods must have had a hand in her salvation. Julia should be restored as priestess because the gods have spoken, the sin has been paid for, and the law has been fulfilled. Would any of you hesitate to show mercy to one who has been miraculously saved from punishment and death? Would you hesitate to forgive her sins if it were clear that by choosing forgiveness, you were following in the God's path of divine mercy? Would you set your own counsel against theirs? We must not hesitate to extend clemency to Julia, the sinful but repentant priestess. We must have the moral compunction to stand against unrighteous anger and vengeance, and prove that we have the wisdom to draw the line between anger, foolishly unleashed, or carefully restrained. Thank you.
We observe and take in what happens around us. What we take in will be passed on to our children, and that, in turn, will shape who they are. Any priestess found guilty of immorality must be thrown from the Tarpeian Rock. A priestess named Julia was caught committing an act of immorality. She is cast off the rock to receive punishment, but there is an unexpected complication. She escapes the intended penalty, surviving the fall. There is now debate on whether she should be thrown again. She should be cast from the rock again, ensuring her proper execution. This is because it would be influential, empowering, and it would ensure safety. The priestess should be cast from the rock again because it is influential. It will send a firm and clear message to our citizens. Breaking the law will not be tolerated. It displays the strength and wisdom of our government. If we do not execute this woman, people will assume that a priestess who is meant to serve the gods can get away with blatant sin and disrespect without proper punishment. If a woman who is meant to be under divine submission can escape punishment, what's to stop other criminals from doing the exact same thing? The priestess should be cast from the rock again because it is empowering. The gods and the people demand punishment. They will look at the priestess who did not receive the implied penalty and believe that our government is weak, lazy, or careless. If they cannot trust the government, they cannot trust the law. We must show them that we have a grasp on legal affairs and how to handle them smoothly and with equity. The priestess should be cast from the rock again because it will ensure safety. We already have criminals in our city. We don't want them to become more confident or to gain more of them. If this woman mocks the law and gets away with it, criminals will become more bold and violent. They will know that they too have the chance to escape the full extent of the law. If we execute the priestess, they will see that we are not playing around and will discipline criminals severely but justly. This will dramatically decrease criminal activity. Executing this woman will leave residents feeling safe and sound with the knowledge that no criminal will escape proper punishment for their actions. Some might argue that the law only says she was to be thrown off the rock, not that she had to die. While it is true that the law does not explicitly state that a faithless and immoral priestess like Julia must die, it is clear that the intention is death. The Tarpeian Rock is about 80 feet tall, so it is evident that any fall from such a great height
would be fatal. The priestess surviving the fall was unexpected and highly unusual. When the authorities were writing this law, it was apparent to them, as it would be apparent to anyone, that no one was to be expected to survive such a great height. They did not see the need for details because this punishment is clearly a death sentence. While the law did not explicitly state the desired penalty was death, it is obvious that the intended punishment was execution. An additional argument is that she should be left alive because she has either suffered enough or because leaving her alive in her weakened state would further her punishment. The answer to these is one and the same. We do not have the jurisdiction, whether divine or governmental, to decide to extend a punishment or to decide that the criminal has suffered enough. This can be decided only by the law. We do not have the authority to make the decision of lessening or extending corporal punishment. The only appropriate and fulfilling punishment is to throw her from the rock again. She should be cast from the rock again, ensuring her proper execution. This is because it would be influential, empowering, and it would ensure safety. If she lives, we make a costly allowance. People will recognize that instead of properly addressing this crime of immorality, our government glides over it. They will not have a reason to take the law as seriously and will not have a problem doing so. Their children will have even less of a problem, and their children's children will have no problem at all. What one generation tolerates, the next generation will embrace. John Wesley.
Awesome. All right, my job's not going to be very easy, is it? All right, last matchup, Kai and Sophia. The scenario. If a man seduces a maiden, by law the maiden chooses whether he must either marry her or be executed. A man seduces a maiden, flees, and cannot be found. The woman takes a husband. The seducer is later found, and now the woman demands his life. Kai is arguing that the seducer should be executed, and Sophia is arguing that he should not be executed.
May the best man win.
Yeah, you can go ahead. I was just trying to decide if I wanted to, like the Tarentum wool one is just take a second to kind of get. Did everybody catch what the issue is here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did? Okay, so we'll let you get it then.
Imagine a world where law is obsolete, a system of terror where the weak huddle, are hurt, and hide away for fear of abuse, because there is no law to protect them. For without law, the vulnerable suffer and are left to the whims of the wicked. Now, what this vision clearly shows us is that the law, and by extension upholding it, is vital for the survival of any nation. The question before us then is whether we can allow exceptions to stand against these universal truths. There was once a fair maiden who caught the eye of a passing man, and he resolved to seduce her. He soon succeeded, and the woman, trusting him, gave him her affection. But the man knew the law, that the woman he had wronged would one day either demand marriage or his life. Rather than face either of these options, he chose a third path. He slipped away under the cover of night and stowed away on a passing ship, abandoning the woman whose honor he had stolen. Now, in time, the woman found a good husband and slowly rebuilt her life. The seducer was neither seen nor heard of again. That is, until 1 week ago, when he returned to our shores. And now the woman who he betrayed demands the justice the law promised her. I shall prove that this man deserves execution for 3 reasons. First, the seducer cannot escape the consequences of his own wrongdoing. Second, the woman's later marriage does not erase the original crime. And third, the seducer himself chose death. First, the seducer cannot escape the consequences of his own crime. If the tables allow a man to escape justice simply by fleeing, then we are teaching every criminal, every convict, the same lesson, that they too can outrun the law. Run far enough, long enough, and no longer do the laws of this earth apply.
Tell me, senators, does not a man's shadow follow its owner? A crime is like a shadow. No matter where a man may run, it follows. You cannot outrun something that is forever attached to your being. To say otherwise is to simply deny the rules of life. Senators, a law that can be outrun is really no law at all. Second, the woman's later marriage does not erase the original crime. Just because she has rebuilt her life does not mean the seducer is free from his crimes. Her marriage may secure her future, but it does not erase his. Bear with me for a moment. If a man is wounded, but in time that wound heals over, do we pretend that it was never there to begin with? Of course not. And neither does a woman's matrimony make the law void. It did not cease to apply. It binds him forever. We cannot even entertain the thought that somehow her good and honorable marriage nullifies the fact that this man is a seducer. Or that his crimes may be excused simply because the seduced turned her life around. This woman deserves everything that is now hers. The seducer deserves the sword. Third, the seducer himself chose his fate. He was given two choices, marriage or death. When he chose to run instead of marrying this woman, he effectively closed that path forever and left only one remaining option, death. In fleeing, he sealed his fate. When a man encounters a fork in the road, he leaves a path and chooses the other. This is simple logic. Senators, avoiding one path means certainty for the other. Now, my opponent might say that the law was made to ensure the restoration of the woman's honor, and since she has already been restored by marrying a good man, execution is no longer necessary. That is only part of the problem. Yes, the law was made to ensure the woman retained her honor, but it was also made to punish those who take advantage of others. If punishment is necessary only when the victim remains harmed, then what stands in the way of it happening again? We would teach that crime carries no punishment, that justice itself can be avoided. We would make the law punish only when it is needed least and fail when it is needed most. I began this speech by asking you if we can allow exceptions to stand against important laws. Now, I ask you again, can we? A criminal who escapes justice opens the floodgates. A law that gives way to convenience is no law at all. If we set this man free, we will be washed away by crime, a flood that we will be unable to control. Now, even if we ignore that, we have forgotten one thing, that the woman has the choice to marry or execute the seducer. Now, that choice was denied her when the seducer fled, but now he is here, facing justice for his crimes. That choice belongs to the woman, and to the woman alone. And she has chosen. Senators of Rome, do not let this man outrun the law. Let the sword, and with it, justice, fall.
Cicero, a man who learned, fought, and cared for justice, said, "The strictest laws often lead to the greatest injustice." Looking at this strict law, a woman who is seduced has the right to either marry or kill her seducer. We must decide whether it is right in this case. The facts of the case are these. A young woman, Julia, was walking one day when a man, Marcus, seduced her. Giving in to his pleas, Julia disgraced herself. After a while, Marcus realized his mistake and ran off. Julia remained silent about her sins. Soon, she found real love and married a steady man. Back onto the scene comes Marcus. Julia decided that now was the time to speak up and call Marcus out. Since she is already married, Julia calls for his life. We all agree that these two committed a grievous act. However, some cry for mercy for Marcus, while others cry, "Execute him." Marcus should not be executed because it's not right, it's not redemptive, and it's not reasonable. The first reason that this man should be forgiven is that Julia's cause is no longer right. Of course, the law should not be banned for every miserable case such as this, but let's look closely at the events. If exceptions are never acceptable, then why is any court necessary? Julia gave her honor away. What happens when a maiden loses her honor? Her prospects of marriage drops considerably. Clearly, this did not affect hers. She is settled down happily. Why does she need to enforce this law then? What are her motives for watching someone she once cared for, even in the basest sense, hang, burn, or have his head chopped off? Does it bring her joy? Does it restore her honor? Destroying a knife does not bring a murdered man back to life. No, if we investigate closely, we find that her motives are not just, but rather seated in self-righteous revenge. Julia is simply bitter that she did not get the exact thing she wanted for an act she participated in. The second reason is that Marcus should not be killed, is that he was not the only sinner. The word seduce contains an element of choice. He did not force Julia to lie with him. He begged and pleaded, and Julia went along with it. This law is unjust. We are confusing the young men of our country by holding inconsistent laws. Certain women, prostitutes, entertainers, slaves, are permissible to be immoral with. But immorality with a consenting fellow citizen is punishable by death. The fact that this is a continuing problem being prosecuted in our courts says that might be due to the result of a faulty law system. To err is human, Cicero says, but to continue in error is foolish. We made a mistake in enacting this law. To stubbornly continue to enforce it is foolish. However, the changing of Roman law is complicated and controversial, so perhaps it's best to move on to the third point. The third reason that we should refrain from killing is that a live man is better than a dead one. There are other alternatives to help Rome. When you kill a man, you only receive the gratitude of a family, one family. What if he was given mercy for his misdeed and held to the servitude to the city of Rome? There are many jobs of low degree that would be perfect for such a man. He would learn to hate the sin that brought him to be so despised, and the work would appeal to his better nature. And while he put this in practice, fathers could also teach their daughters the virtue of purity. A man in debt is a useful servant. A dead man is useful to no one. Some are saying that the accused is notorious, that he should not live because he's a menace. He was foolish. He was certainly very much in the wrong. But then again, did not the woman sin as well? We phrase it as the woman was seduced, as though she were the victim. Well, sometimes women are the victim. Seducement is a different matter. The word seduce implies some sort of choice was involved. By killing this man, we are essentially saying that women deserve a second chance. But men, nope. Once men of the country are blotted, they're always blotted. If you cry for death, you must ask for the death of both offenders. So are women more important than men? This law was written to help a woman's prospects in marriage. But once those are secure, you are simply punishing a man for a sin that both parties committed. We should spare Marcus this useless death because it's not right, it's not reasonable, and it's not redemptive. Although we pride ourselves in justice, we must also take pride in our wisdom. When you punish a man forever for a sin that he's left behind, you punish no crime but a man who's changed. As Seneca reminds us, he who repents of a fault is almost innocent. Let us be wise, let us be just, and let us grant mercy to this man. But also, we can give him a chance to prove that even a life once shadowed by sin can be made pure again.
Right? Yeah? Well, that was really awesome. They've always done a good job on Thursdays when we do our speeches, but they took it up a notch. So that was really cool. Thanks everybody for coming and giving them the reason to put a little bit of extra work into it. Let me just make sure I'm not keeping anybody too long. I do want to point out how cool it is. I didn't hear anybody go off script. Did anybody notice that somebody wasn't using the structure properly?
I don't think so.
I only get to happen once which is, I don't know, parents, like I wouldn't have realized this until I started teaching, how often certainly 12-year-olds, but also 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds, and then probably college students too, you give them instructions for a paper that they got to write, and all of a sudden they're not writing a paper anymore, right? Or like the instructions say, I was thinking about one specifically now, I can't remember which one it was, but like, I can imagine a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old not really liking their side so much, and so they end up like creating a third category. So, well, what if we did this? That happens so much with 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds. It's like, I gotta disqualify you because that wasn't, no, you were supposed to say he needs to be expelled. We're not creating a third category. You didn't follow the instructions. And not a single person did that. So how cool is that? That 8 out of 8, are you the youngest?
No, Natalya is.
Oh, how old are you?
15.
Yeah, okay, so 15 to what? 17 or 18?
17.
Yeah, 15 to 17-year-olds, 8 out of 8 of them did all the structure exactly right. That's very cool. It's a huge blessing to me, so I'm very thankful that I get to teach your students. And the other great thing is, because we're speaking every single week, and we've been doing these classical speeches, I think, for maybe 5 weeks, the last 5 weeks, we're learning together, like I'm learning things as well, which I'm really thankful for. I can give some examples, like Eli, he kept putting these one-liners that would just like, they would really hit home. And we realized how important those were. And because he kept doing that and we realized how impactful they were, we started analyzing other people's speech and realized like, oh yeah, you know what? Whenever you listen to a Doug Wilson sermon, he's always got like one line in there that's just like, he says it 3 times over because he knows it's good, right? And so I heard that from the 2 that I specifically remember. Leah had a one-liner. It was very, okay, that's her one-liner.
Put that in there.
Yeah, and Kai had a clear one-liner too. So it's been really fun because I wouldn't have, I'm preparing a speech, whatever. I wouldn't, after I've drafted my speech, say, okay, where's my one-liner? I gotta have a good one-liner to like really hit it home. But now I know, it's like, because I've learned from the class, like you gotta have that one-liner. The other thing too about it that's really fun that we're learning from each other is that you all just saw it, like different people have different strengths and weaknesses. Like some people are a little more nervous. Some people have no nerves at all. Some people have a strong voice. Some people are a little bit more timid. And it wasn't as obvious today because they've had a lot of practice. But it is really cool that there's people with strengths and weaknesses. Like obviously Kai, that he can put his stand away. And hopefully the camera was still able to catch it. He didn't walk out of the frame. Yeah. But Kai can put the stand away, and I think like Zeke is very relaxed, and Eli's got a strong voice. Natalya has a strong voice too, right? Like everybody just has different strengths and weaknesses. So we've been learning from each other this year, and it's been a lot of fun. So thank you for the opportunity to teach your kids. It's been
Can we
a
give
huge
the
blessing.
students a prompt that
Yeah.
waiting to hear the results is a crime against human
I was planning to post them Sunday night with the homework, so you'll hear.
Put them in the announcements.
And I do have to say, you guys already know this is true, but I just have to make sure I put it out there. It's like I'm obviously gonna have to nix 4 great speeches, right? Like everybody did a fantastic job. So 4 people are gonna lose who are like, but I did such a good job. It's like, yes, you did. But we had to choose some.
I do not envy your place.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
job, guys.